Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here really to talk a little bit about what we think was quite a useful activity that the United Nations conducted last week in Dhaka, Bangladesh, well, actually earlier this week, to try to start at a very modest level to build cooperation between the countries of the region on countering terrorism. But perhaps first, just to kind of set where I fit within the spectrum of counter-terrorism mechanisms that operate in the UN, I represent the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate. Now that is one of the UN Security Council bodies. Basically, the counter-terrorism in the UN is divided between three committees of the Security Council: 1267, 1373 and 1540, the numbers of course being the resolutions. 1267 deals with the Taliban and Al-Qaida list. 1373 is the broadest of the three, and that was the resolution passed not long after 9/11, 2 weeks after 9/11, and that's the one that we work to, that's the committee we work to. And then 1540 deals with the importance of denying WMD to terrorists. CTED and the Counter-Terrorism Committee, what we work to do is to help countries, first of all, to monitor how countries are implementing their obligations under Resolution 1373. 1373 is an extraordinarily broad resolution because it requires countries to not only criminalise terrorism but deny terrorists safe haven, to prevent them from crossing their borders, to deny them financial resources, to cooperate with other countries to bring them to justice. So that all requires a lot of activity and creation of new mechanisms and so on. So over the years since 1373 was passed, the committee, more recently helped by CTED, has conducted a dialogue with every country through reports and questions as to how they're going in these various different areas of counterterrorism. And we have visited quite a few countries, nearly 50 actually, where we spend a week or so and we look quite closely at their different counterterrorism mechanisms and strategies and legislation and so on, and how they're actually implemented. Now, that's our kind of broad way in which we do this. As a supplement to that, where we find that there are vulnerabilities, particularly in developing countries, we then take it upon ourselves to try to help find technical assistance somewhere that can address that vulnerability, and that might be in another international organisation, or it might be through a bilateral program. We ourselves have no mandate to provide technical assistance, and we have no funds to do so. So that's the context in which we conducted this activity. We have been looking at South Asia for some time. We've actually formally visited three of the countries on assessment missions, notably Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. And we were very aware that this is a region that probably more than just about any other in the world has suffered grievously from terrorism over a very long time. And we've just had so many recent reminders of that, including the dreadful bombing in Peshawar a couple of weeks ago, the attacks on the UN office and the WFP office rather in Pakistan about 4 weeks ago, the attack in Kabul, but so many other attacks, including of course the years in which Sri Lanka was dealing with the terrorism of the Tamil Tigers. So there has been Mumbai, of course, 12 months ago. So there are lots of examples, and it's a region that has suffered a lot from counter-terrorism. One of the things we've noted as we travel around the world is the importance of regional cooperation to deal with terrorism, because it's kind of axiomatic when you think about it. Most terrorists operate across borders. They seek refuge in other places, neighbouring countries. They very often prepare themselves. Their materials are brought across borders. Recruits are brought across borders. That's a facet of this global problem that we are all very aware of, and it's why everywhere we try to strengthen things like border control, aviation security, and so on. And we were very aware that actually in South Asia is an area where the amount of regional cooperation has been rather limited, and we thought that we needed to try to do something to start building habits of cooperation between the countries. Now, there is a regional mechanism which is called SARC, the South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation. And in fact, SARC was the first of the regional organizations to adopt a regional convention on counterterrorism back in 1987. But actually that instrument has not really developed, or rather the sort of cooperation that was imagined from it has not really developed for reasons that probably you would all understand, notably tensions between different countries in the region. So we thought that if at a political level we couldn't get more interaction and more cooperation, we might try to start at a more working level. And so on that basis, we conceived the idea of having just prosecutors and police come together from each of the 8 countries and just sit down and spend 3 days with some facilitation talking about how their lives and their work would be improved if they could talk to each other more, just comparing notes on how they do their stuff. And we were really, frankly, delighted when we found that all 8 countries that we invited agreed to come, and those 8 countries were Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and the Maldives. All 8 countries came. All 8 sent, I think there were 2 who were missing for logistical reasons. I think we only got 1 representative from Afghanistan and 1 from Nepal, but otherwise we got the 2 from each. The way we did it is we had a meeting which brought them all together, and this meeting was hosted by the Bangladesh government, actually paid for by the Australian and Danish governments. And we brought in some of our partner organisations with a specialisation to facilitate the 2 parallel working groups we organised, one dealing with the police, and we had someone from Interpol there, plus someone from the Jakarta Centre for Law Enforcement Cooperation, which is a Southeast Asian institution that is dealing in this sort of area. On the other side, we had the Commonwealth Secretariat facilitating the prosecutors. Now, after 3 days, we were, I have to say, pretty gratified to see the extent to which these professionals were reacting with each other in a very positive way, in a very professional way, and in a way that they all thought they got something out of it in terms of, I mean, the way the workshops unfolded, it did involve conveying, latest information on techniques and so on. We had also the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights there, and that was an important component in both of the 2 working groups, that is, how counter-terrorism can actually be advanced by conducting operations and conducting counter-terrorism efforts with a full respect for the rule of law and in accordance with the sorts of recommendations that are made by the UN human rights instruments. So at the end of the day, the Bangladesh government was very pleased with it. We were very pleased with it. The participants all said that they would like to do it again soon. They see it as a real opportunity to build their links with each other. We're not saying this is an enormous breakthrough. I certainly don't think it's that, but it's a small but significant first step at a working level on building cooperation, and it's something which the UN can do. I think that's one of the reasons why we did it. The truth is that I don't think there's probably anyone else quite who could have done it. We in the UN recognise that most counter-terrorism happens in other places. It's mostly done on a bilateral basis, on a regional basis. We don't have the sorts of expertise to do a lot of that stuff. But there are niche areas where the UN can make a difference, and this is certainly one of them, and we regarded this as a good example. So we wanted to draw it to the press's attention. I might just mention also a couple of days before that, in last week, we did another workshop in Pakistan, and that was a workshop for parliamentarians. And what we were trying to do there was the Pakistan government for some years, both the previous one and the current one, have been trying to pass legislation through the national parliament on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. And the Parliament has been quite sceptical of this and has resisted it. So what we thought is if we could run an expert workshop, getting the relevant parliamentarians together and sat down and kind of explain to them why this is important, getting some other people from outside to come in and say why their countries have done it. We managed to bring in a parliamentarian from Turkey, for example, who gave a presentation on why countering the financing of terrorism through legislation is really very important. We brought in someone from the Charities Commission in the UK who could explain why that particular sector is quite vulnerable to terrorist financing. And at the end of that, we again felt that the parliamentarians had a better sense of why it's important to do this stuff. Of course, we did this with the full support and with the encouragement of the Pakistan government, which is trying to get this legislation through. So in the last week, basically, we've done a couple of exercises for encouraging in the counter-terrorism area in South Asia.